Okay, thank you for coming along, everybody. Good afternoon. We'll get started now, even though there may be some others still joining us and making their way here. Welcome to the very last webinar in this series, the series called Challenge Accepted. If you've missed our previous webinars, you can find them on the BehaviouWorks Australia website. And we'll be posting the link to that website to you shortly. So it's lovely to have you here today. I'm Philia Garibaldis. I'm a member of the BehaviouWorks Australia education team, but I'm also a member of the MSDI education team, where I'm the course director of the Master of Behaviour and Systemic Change and the Graduate Certificate of Behaviour Change. I'm also privileged to deliver some of the BehaviouWorks Australia professional development courses, such as our Behaviour Change Solutions short course, which is currently underway. And I enjoy conducting research on the application of behavioural insights to address a range of teaching and learning challenges. So it's with great pleasure that I'm hosting this webinar today, during which we will hear from three wonderful speakers. I will introduce them to you very shortly, but first I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which our speakers and I are coming to you today, so the Bunurong people, at Clayton, where our offices are located. And I'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to any Indigenous members who are with us here today. We recognise the significant contribution that Indigenous knowledges and modes of understanding can make to the way we learn and how we practice our education and how we conduct our research and collaboration with our partners. More importantly, we recognise that preparing the next generation is a collective effort contributed to by many, and that learning needs to be a holistic process involving more than just the acquisition of knowledge. You will have noticed that today's session is being recorded so that you can come back to it later. Before we get stuck into what we've prepared for you today, I'd like to very briefly introduce you to who we are at BWA, at BehaviouWorks Australia. And my apologies if you're hearing this for the fourth time. BehaviouWorks Australia is Australia's largest university-based behaviour change research enterprise and the only dedicated behavioural science unit that sits within a sustainability institute or centre. We boast over 25 PhD qualified research fellows. We have several PhD students and have completed over 700 projects since we were founded in 2011 with the support of government and industry partners. Our work has measurable impact on knowledge, practice and policy and focuses on creating change for good to help create a thriving and sustainable world. And just some housekeeping. We've mentioned that today's webinar is being recorded and it'll be uploaded to our website, so you can come back to it later. Throughout the presentations, we will be collecting your questions through the Q&A function in Zoom. So please add your questions as they pop into your head during the presentations. I will respond where I can, but our speakers will respond as well once they've completed their presentation. And we'll allow some time at the end for some more questions. Now, previously in this series, we've spoken about the value that behavioural science brings to a range of complex problems, how it can contribute to systems change, and the way behavioural science is used in organisations. But for our last webinar today, we'll be focusing on building behavioural science capacity within an organisation. We've worked quite a bit with organisations and we noticed that they vary widely in how far they have progressed on their behavioural science journey. So some organisations house behavioural insights teams, others support their staff on behaviour change, who are delivering behaviour change, and others outsource their behaviour change needs to experts such as BehaviouWorks Australia. And this webinar explores multiple complementary strategies for developing internal expertise. But when we talk about capability development or capacity development, we're usually referring to education and training that includes a basic awareness of behavioural principles, applying simple behavioural tools, conducting targeted research, or advancing practices like testing innovative methods, and exploring new behavioural questions. The aim is always to instill the skills, tools and methods needed to deliver behaviour change programs effectively. At Behaviour Works Australia, we offer programs that address all of these needs in some way, from short educational webinars such as this one, to multiple day in-person workshops such as our masterclasses, to self-paced online programs like our micro-credential program, and to boot camps. We also offer a graduate certificate of behaviour change, and for the brave, a Master of Behaviour and Systemic Change, both starting in 2026. And across all of our various deliveries, our wonderful education team applies the most effective pedagogies and adult learning strategies focused on imparting practical, hands-on experience to build both confidence and deep expertise. So today we will hear about 3 very different types of capacity building that we deliver to organisations. Our speakers are Jeff Payne, Bernice Plant, and Hannah Elias. I'll be introducing each speaker separately. As I mentioned earlier, during their presentation, we welcome you to add any comments or questions you have in the chat. They will be addressed by the speaker once he or she has finished their presentation. And we hope you have some time at the end for Q&A. So let's begin with Jeff. Jeff is a trained actor who designs and facilitates workshops to equip current and potential leaders with the skills needed to effectively tackle challenging interactions. These immersive workshops allow participants to replay different scenarios and to choose the best outcome possible, rather than simply reacting emotionally in real time. So Jeff will present on the work he's been involved in, which uses the learning tool called simulation.
Okay. Philia, thank you so much for that introduction. I think that's a very generous introduction to me. Yes, I'm an actor by training, a storyteller by trade, and I showcase the work of Behaviour Works Australia and behavioural science. And the common thread between behavioural science and acting is that they both ask the same question: why do people do what they do? And we know that our behaviour impacts others and that we should use this power for good and we should get better at it. So today we're going to look at different ways that we can build capability in organisations. So just to explain about the simulation training, we all act differently depending on the context that we find ourselves in. So when a cop pulls up beside you at the traffic lights, when you're trying to get through airport security or passport control, when you put on your parent voice, these are individual behavior changes that are designed to achieve a particular outcome. And whether that's to not arouse suspicion or to look like you meld into the background and you're a perfectly innocent person, or you simply want the kids to do what you want them to do, these are the goals. We all change our behavior, and we most often change as a result of external stimuli, but we can also choose the version of ourselves we want to be in different situations. So simulation training is really about putting people in challenging situations and then coming up with a menu of options for the desired outcome they would like to glean. So how does it work? How does our 3-step simulation work? Basically, the stages are we do a setup, which is where I work with about 15 people, and one at a time, those people in the simulation will explain the challenge that they're dealing with. And my job is to actually play that challenging person that they're dealing with. We begin this improvisation, and this incorporates acting and improvisation techniques. All of us improvise, basically. Everyone that's ever had a conversation all day, that's an improvisation. You're making stuff up. We role play for about 30 seconds, maybe a minute, then we stop and we discuss with the group and share insights and anecdotes and feedback about what they've just seen. And then the person who is in that hotspot, the person who has basically come up with the scenario, takes in some of that information to decide this is what I'm going to do, and we replay the scene again. So the idea is we see the challenge, we discuss what the issue is, and then we replay it. So I should point out that these workshops are one-off workshops. They take place over a couple of hours. As I say, I work with about up to 15 people at a time. This is the practical side of behavior change. We don't deal with behavior change theories as such. This is very much a get up and have a go sort of workshop. And we're actually supported by colleagues and the people that are in the room because it's their insights and it's their knowledge that keeps this real. And that's a key point to any simulation. It just needs to be just real enough to have the benefit. The crowdsourcing and the comments fights the idea that we can assume that we have a clear answer. So it's very important that people understand there are different ways of reacting to a situation, and we don't want to assume we have one simple answer to this. We go for a group idea about what could go on, and replaying it allows for changes in these outcomes and sometimes pushes us outside our comfort zone, which is, I think, important for people to do. So, some key situations that we need to understand. Simulations can be a kind of a vaccine, and by that, I simply mean that a vaccine is a fake threat. We expose our body to this fake threat, but the body develops a very real resilience to it. And if simulations are real enough, they can work the same way. They can expose our system to what is perceived as a challenge, and we can learn how to deal with that challenge. That's the point of all simulations. It's to prepare us for the real situation when that happens. By putting people into a hot spot, putting them under pressure, it produces the stress reaction. That's healthy, that's good. And in this case, they can stop, refocus, and start again. And most of us have wished we'd been in a situation where we could stop, get our thoughts together, and start the whole thing again. And the aim really is that we dig a hole for each of the participants and then we dig them out again. So while we know the simulations aren't real, they just need to be real enough that we can make sure that they work properly and that they could have enough stress that people actually feel like this is having a benefit to me. And crowdsourcing means everyone's involved. So everyone watching this basically can contribute ideas and anecdotes and wisdom, things that work or don't work in the past. So let's have a look at 3 different examples. And the first is boards behaving badly. Now, this was a problem that many boards experience, that board members don't have experience in questioning or challenging others in board meetings, and it can have negative or, in fact, catastrophic consequences. And the background to this particular problem was that there was an outer metro hospital in Melbourne a number of years ago where there were a series of preventable baby deaths. 29 babies had died. They held an inquiry into what was going on and realised that part of the dysfunction was the board itself, because the board did not know how to challenge the CEO in this situation and had no experience in this. So we had to come up with a program where we could simulate for the board a chance for them to actually see if they could change the outcome. And that's what we did. What we simulated was the behaviors of bullies, of technocrats. These could be medical officers that basically use a lot of medical jargon to baffle members of the board. It could be the charming evader, someone who is well-spoken and charming, but evades the actual question. The histrionic, that could be someone that pounds the desk and says, I have worked in this hospital for 30 years, and basically shuts down a lot of discussions. And straight out sexism, where someone basically cuts, a man might cut a woman off and say, you don't know what you're talking about. I understand this better than you. So these are bad behaviors. And my job was to actually simulate those and say individually to the board members, what do you want to see? How do you want to deal with it? And that's what I was working on. So, whoops, I'll go back there. The participants, basically, we visited 12 different hospital services across the state, metro and regional. And my job was to work with the professional facilitator to make sure everyone had a go at this. And the result was really very, very positive. We went back afterwards and asked the boards how they were going with their board meetings. And there was a demonstrable kind of improvement and confidence in the participants, those who'd taken part, particularly those who managed to stay focused and also had the belief that others were now supporting them. So in terms of collegiality, as soon as people talked about issues that they had or a lack of confidence, other members of the board said, I've got your back. Just give me the look and I will be able to help you with this. So it was actually very positive. I even had one board member elatedly sack me as CEO. She was her last board member, last board meeting, I should say, and she'd never sacked anyone, and she was absolutely delighted to give it a shot. So it does push people out of their comfort zone, but it's very effective. All right. Now, senior surgical teams is another example. We worked with a senior surgical team here in Melbourne. And of course, you can imagine that they face high pressure, difficult interactions all day, every day. The hierarchies that they work with are real and implied. And they simply wanted to achieve better outcomes and adapt their behaviors to reduce those personal frictions and interactions. Now, I was surprised to find out that most of the scenarios I was given were not based in an operating theatre. I thought that's where the tension would be the strongest. But in fact, they said inside the operating theatre, everyone is in work mode to get the task done. It's before and after. It's outside the operating theatre. It's high pressured meetings. And they had a number of situations that they had to deal with, particularly with personal interactions or patients that don't want to cooperate, or relatives that have alternative therapies. So what did we simulate? It was unprofessional, condescending behavior. It was the kind of hand of God surgeon that does not ever want to be questioned. We looked at patients who didn't want to listen. And there are many patients who simply reject bad news. There are relatives who have alternative therapies. There is nothing more chilling for a clinician to hear than I've done my own research. People who get on Dr. Google or on the internet and believe that they know more than professionals. And catastrophic news. This is something that we may not understand, that surgeons and clinicians and doctors have to share potentially seriously catastrophic news. And in this case, it was a doctor telling the parent of an unborn child that the child was missing a limb. So it was preparing someone for a disability for their child. And for most of the participants, they really had a revelation that it wasn't just me. So once they got a chance to share this in the room, they could see that their colleagues were going through other situations that they themselves had experienced. And it worked as a wonderful way to unite the team and to say, I've experienced this before, come to me and we can talk to me about this and share those ideas. And the last example I'll give is a political crisis. So we worked with politicians who at all levels are thrown into dealing with challenging situations without much notice. They don't really often get a chance to prepare something. They're dealing with ambiguity all the time. And of course, they face just radio hosts and journalists and angry citizens with little or no preparation. So we worked with state and federal politicians. It was online, it was on Zoom because this was around the COVID time. And my job was to prepare a kind of rolling omni crisis. I had to prepare individual crises for each one of the politicians on this Zoom, where they had to jump in. They couldn't prepare as such. They were simply given the problem and had to deal with it as best they could. But importantly, they agreed that they would not bring party politics into this. And one of the background issues to this is that politicians are not only competing with the party, the opposing side, but there are tensions within the parties themselves. So they often feel as if they have to make decisions alone and by themselves. And this was about sharing insights. So the rolling crisis was basically a regional flood, a massive regional flood, slowly heading towards the big cities with unexpected outcomes. And this was affecting regional cities and urban Australians. So everyone on the Zoom was actually part of this. We had the bogan citizens who were basically sailing down the floodwaters saying, "Oh, I can do what I like, the law does not apply to me." We had town mayors who were suggesting that the brand new sewage recycling plant that they connected should be switched off, that the water was cleaner than that which they were taking from recycled. We had mining companies who said, "We can save this regional city if you let us blow up a national park and redirect the water." We had police commanders who were saying, "We've got people crossing the borders at the moment. What do we do? Do we shut the borders or open it up?" And so these were real world challenges. These were things that, as we know, are happening all the time. And it was a terrific exercise for the politicians on the Zoom to actually stop, ask for advice, and get advice from each other, and to see really strong displays of collegiality in a profession where it's hard to find sometimes. So they agreed to work as a team, and they did. And it was very impressive to see a group working together like that. So I've only got a minute to go. So I just wanted to wind up by saying we can choose which version of ourselves we want to be. And that is the truth of our behavior. Simulation training works. There's a very strong evidence base that when people get a chance to practice something, they get better at it. And that leads to the final one, which is any desired behavior requires practice. You can't work from muscle memory unless you have the memory of going through that in the first place. So simulation training is a non-risky way of preparing for situations that you want to be able to be prepared for in the future. So I look forward to any questions you have. And at this stage, I am going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand it back to Philia.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for sharing your work. And it's great to see that capacity building is taking place through simulation, which is a fundamental way we learn, actually. And for those of you who think you don't have much to do with simulation, I invite you to think back to your kindergarten days where you played mums and dads and doctors and nurses. So that too was an example of simulation in action. We will move on to our next speaker. I will remind you though that the Q&A is open for any questions that you might have. Please post your questions there and we'll get them answered. So now we'll be introducing Dr. Bernice Plant. Bernice has empowered staff in organizations with game-changing behavioral science principles, showing how to boost the impact of their programs through hands-on training and high-impact boot camps. So she's a research fellow at BehaviouWorks. She's been there for 6 years or so, and her work spans the environment and health and social portfolio space. So over to you, Bernice.
So sorry, I was just trying to find the mute. Thank you so much, Philia. Thanks for that lovely introduction. So yeah, Jeff has spoken about drawing on behavioural science and simulation training to build capability. And today I'll be sharing how we've used training to build capability and organisational capacity in behavioural science. So Philia provided a really nice overview of our training offerings at BehaviouWorks Australia. And today I'm just going to focus on one of these training approaches known as the Behaviour Change Bootcamp. So the Behaviour Change Bootcamp we've delivered with a range of organisations and to over 160 participants. Behaviour Change Bootcamp is, as the name suggests, a very hands-on experience. So the training isn't just about learning behavioural science concepts. It's really about building the capability to apply the thinking and the methods in real-world settings. So if we were to play on the bootcamp metaphor, essentially we invite participants to jump into the behavioural science mud with us. And because it's run with groups within organisations, we also focus on developing teams to embed these approaches in their everyday practice. So at the core of the bootcamp and many of our other training programs is the BehaviouWorks method, which you can see on screen now. So the method is an evidence-based framework that guides how we work to understand and address behavioural challenges. Now, I won't go into the details here, but essentially it involves 3 main phases, which you can see on the screen. So the first of these, the exploration phase, is about exploring the problem. The second, the deep dive, is about gaining a deep understanding of the behavior and what interventions might work to support it. And the third, the application phase, is about applying these insights for impact. So within the Behavior Change Bootcamp, participants are coached through this process, and each bootcamp is tailored to the organisation and to the context. So I thought it might be nice to take you through how this can play out in a real-world setting through a case study. So last year we ran a bootcamp with members of the Safer Together Community First team. Safer Together is a multi-agency program in Victoria that aims to reduce bushfire risk to Victorians. It's led by CFA and DECA and in partnership with local government and land and fire agencies. The Community First stream is strongly aligned with the Victorian bushfire management strategy, particularly the outcome that communities are more resilient to the impacts of bushfires and bushfire management activities. And you can see some of the areas of work on the slide now as well. Now, within the team, behavioural insights has been championed as a way to communicate and engage more effectively with communities, but also to integrate diverse forms of knowledge, so science, but also evidence, experience, and local insight, and also to support a systems approach to change, so recognising that there's not just one pathway to change. So core members of the Community First team were looking to build capability and broader capacity to apply behavioural science to their work. And as part of a long-term collaboration with the Community First team, we recommended a behaviour change bootcamp to support their team. So with that context in mind, I'll take you through what the behaviour change bootcamp looked like in practice. Okay, so the slide in front of you just summarises the participants and how they were set up into groups for the bootcamp. So we had 30 participants from across the Safer Together agencies, and this was quite a diverse group. The participants were organised into 6 teams, and each of these teams worked on a different behavioural challenge, but all with a goal of supporting communities. We had 8 mentors, so each team had 1 to 2 mentors who provided guidance on the approach and also supported participants in between the sessions. We also had what we called context experts, so someone who worked closely within the challenge area and could bring deep practical insights. We had 1 to 2 of those per group as well. So we were quite intentional in working with the Community First team to set up these different challenge teams to make sure that we accounted for and also benefited from the diverse experience and expertise in the room, because there was a range of behavioural science experience and expertise. Now, in terms of the approach that we took to the bootcamp, so because this bootcamp included mentors, we began with a full-day facilitation masterclass to support the mentors in their role before the bootcamp officially started. And the core of the bootcamp included 3 full-day in-person sessions, which were spread across 3 months. Each of these days aligned with the different phases of the Behaviour Works method, roughly, and combined learning with live application to the team's challenges. So essentially, as I mentioned before, we coached teams through this process. Now, alongside the workshops, we also ran 4 60-minute webinars, which were focused on special topics and were open to a broader audience. The 3 of these we co-presented with invited guests as well, which was really nice. And about a month after the bootcamp had wrapped up, the Community First team hosted an in-person showcase. So this was an opportunity for the teams to present on their challenge, share their insights and their intended approach to address the challenge, and also to reflect on the process together. So you'll see that all of this happened over approximately 5 months, and this longer structure of a bootcamp gives teams time to work on their challenges in between the sessions, with ongoing support, in this case, from their mentors. Something that made this bootcamp quite special, I think, was the close collaboration between the Behaviour Works and Community First teams. So we co-designed the agenda, shaped the challenges, and also curated the webinar topics together. So now that we've seen the structure, let's take a quick look at one of the behavioural challenges that a team worked on. So as I mentioned during the bootcamp, each team worked through key phases of the BehaviouWorks method to unpack a behavioural challenge. And you might be wondering what a challenge looks like in practice. So on screen, I've included an example of one of the challenges that was used during this bootcamp. So you'll see the focus here was on new residents moving from urban centres to regional towns where there might be higher risk of bushfire. Okay, and in this case, it was a challenge because sometimes new residents may not have the same understanding as those who have been there for a long time or experience, and they're also not as well integrated necessarily into the community. So this can put them at greater risk. So as you can imagine, trying to tackle a challenge like this one, it could be approached in various ways. But for the purpose of the bootcamp and for their project, the team who was assigned this challenge focused on encouraging new residents to download the Vic Emergency app and to set watch zones for their township. So this directly related to work that the team was already doing, which meant that they could immediately apply the learnings from the process to their project after the bootcamp. So this slide provides an overview of some of the key benefits and outcomes that we heard from the Community First team or that we observed ourselves. So first, participants developed stronger skills in applying behavioural science to their real-world work, and mentors developed greater confidence to guide others in the use of behavioural science. What participants reported that they valued a lot was the ability to apply this to their real life work, if you like. So things like identifying behavioural focus areas and designing interventions that they felt could make a difference in their work. The resources that were provided were also seen as a key highlight. So participants left with practical tools that they could continue to use after the bootcamp. And beyond individual capability, there were broader outcomes as well. So as you'll see there, relationships across agencies were strengthened. Of course, as I mentioned, challenge teams were developed. And also the bootcamp helped to deepen our partnership, which was really nice and helpful in sparking ideas for ongoing collaboration, which was great. So sometimes these kinds of outcomes related to relationships can be seen as secondary, but really they're quite critical when we're talking about building organizational capacity, because they help to build momentum and capacity to keep applying behavioral science over time following something like the bootcamp or training. So you might be wondering, well, what contributed to the success? Often when we think of success of training, we think about the qualities of the training itself. And of course, these are really important factors, but it's also important to acknowledge the qualities of partners that contribute to success. So this slide provides an overview of several factors that we think contributed to the success of this particular program. I won't go through all of them, but I'd like to draw your attention to a few of these to the right of the slide. So first, when it came to organizational commitment, so there was strong support from leadership, which meant that participants were able to dedicate the time for the bootcamp activities and also to invest time in the homework outside of the sessions. So this is really, really important, is having that support and the dedicated time, not just the financial commitment. Values and mindsets also contributed. So the Community First program fosters a learning mindset and encourages reflection, and importantly, they embrace innovation. So there's an openness to doing things differently and to not start with the answers from the get-go, which aligns really well with the BehaviouWorks approach, which is about taking that evidence-based framework to unpack and identify solutions that best fit the problem. And finally, a major strength of the bootcamp we thought was involving participants from the start. So taking them along that journey. Participants brought their own challenges to the bootcamp, and they also helped to shape the agenda, which made the training relevant and grounded in their day-to-day work. So those are some key things that we wanted to highlight as well. And just wanted to mention, here's an example of some feedback that we've received. This is from Stephanie Russell, who's the manager of the Community First program. So the bootcamp is designed to be immersive and hands-on, and I think this quote really captures that experience, that bootcamp is true to its title, and people went away with an overview of what it means to apply a behavioural lens to bushfire management challenges. Okay, so that hopefully that gave you a bit of a taste of the type of what a behaviour change bootcamp might look like, and how training can help to build capability and organisational capacity in behavioural science. And lastly, although I've done all the talking, I just wanted to thank and acknowledge everyone who's contributed to this program, and particularly to my colleagues from the Community First program, from MSGI, and from BehaviourWorks Australia. Thank you. Thanks, Philia.
Thanks so much, Bernice. And it always helps when the organisation and the partner is so supportive of it all. And in fact, this process of empowering organisations to work through and design their own behaviour change programs is our way of sharing our learnings of the work that we do, which is one of actually the very last wedge in the method that Bernice showed earlier today. And as Bernice mentioned, our education team designs these programs bespoke for organisations. So examples are tailored. The tools that they may need are also provided based on their needs. Okay, so last but not least, I welcome Hannah Elias. Hannah has been embedded into organisations through the Researcher in Residence model. She builds expertise directly from within organisations to help cultivate a deep, practical understanding and application of behavioural science over time. Over to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Philia. So we've heard a bit from Jeff and Bernice around some of the sort of tools that organisations use to build capability in the short and medium term. I'll share a few insights and some of the work that we've done with one of our project partners, where they've used a range of different tools to not only build, but also to really embed that capability within their team. So we work closely with the Western Australia Return, Recycle, Renew Limited, or WORL for short. It's a bit of a mouthful. And they, so WORL coordinate the 10-cent container deposit scheme in Western Australia. So they have a number of different objectives that include social outcomes and product stewardship, but the main two that I wanted to highlight today is around increasing the recovery and recycling of empty beverage containers and reducing litter and landfill. So the team at WORL are responsible for delivering the 10-cent container deposit scheme. And something to sort of highlight is that embedding behavioural science is a real strategic priority. So there's an acknowledgement from their executive leadership team that in order to meet those objectives, that we really need to bring people on the journey, and that it's very much a human challenge, but also a human opportunity. So we have a partnership with WORL. So there are two components to it. We have a sort of 3-year researcher in residence partnership that's similar to a retainer model. So with that, I'm the researcher in residence and work really closely with the team. And we also do a number of different projects and sort of bring in our broader BehaviourWorks team to work with WORL. They've taken quite a diverse approach in building capability. So they've drawn on a few different tools. One is education and training. So our team, Denise, Fernanda, and Kavya, delivered a version of the masterclass to the WORL team. And we've received really great feedback from WORL over the last few months and some great outcomes from their end, with 98% of their team actually trained in those behavioural science principles. We've also developed a behaviour change framework for WORL. So this provides a framework for the team to really apply behavioural science to relative to their work and their projects. So it sort of provides that overarching framework, but there are worksheets and things throughout there as well to really help the team to apply those principles. We also do a number of co-design projects, so working closely with different teams at Worrell on really specific projects over a number of weeks or months, and applying different sort of points of the method to help the team to really understand and explore those behavioural challenges. They're sort of the three main tools to highlight, but as well as that, we work on more traditional research projects that BehaviourWorks leads, and we also provide advice and guidance to the team along the way. So the main thing that I'll focus on is around those co-design projects. I really love working with the Worrell team, and it's a great way that we're able to apply the method and explore these challenges while also building capability. So one of the projects that we've worked on is looking at how to increase returns from commercial customers. So we ran with their commercial team 6 mini workshops to map the behaviour chains of commercial audiences or settings. And throughout those workshops, we explored how do we diagnose the behaviours and the barriers and the drivers that people face at different steps along the way. How do we prioritise where we focus on? And then how do we create interventions that help to address some of those barriers? So to start with the diagnosing, we looked at, well, what are the behaviours? So ultimately for Worrell, they want to see commercial customers returning containers, but in order to get there, there are a whole number of steps that people need to take along the way to reach that point. So in the initial workshops, we worked with the commercial team at Worrell to really map out what those behaviours were. So Jen and I sort of brought the behavioural science framework and really drew on the expertise of Worrell's team to identify those behaviours. Once we had those, we looked at, well, at each of those steps, what are the barriers and drivers? So, one of the upfront steps is that they need to decide to participate in the first instance, and some of the barriers there, this is a simplified version of it, but some of the barriers might be this perception that, it takes a lot of effort. And then once we had mapped out the barriers, we looked at, well, there's a whole range of existing communications and interventions, and how do they relate to these steps and barriers that we've identified? And at what point, if just because a resource exists, if it's not communicated at the point that that barrier occurs, looking at sort of the effectiveness there. Once we diagnosed the behaviours, we looked to prioritise. So we were left with 8 different maps across a whole range. We were looking at different types of commercial customers, so looking at the differences between workplaces and cafes and the different sizes of organisations. So we're left with a lot of detail, and at this step we looked at prioritising. So not all steps and barriers are equal. So where is the behaviour chain most likely to break down to help us to identify where do we want to then intervene? And for a lot of the settings and sort of behaviours that we were looking at, that upfront step was really important. So reducing those barriers to entry to really help Worrell to reach that ultimate goal of people returning their containers. The next step was looking at ideating. So again, working with the Worrell team to really look at, we've identified these behaviours and barriers. What interventions do we want to explore? And so building on the types of barriers that we had identified, we applied behavioural science and the appropriate interventions for those types of barriers, and the team came up with a whole range of interventions to explore. One of the interventions included case studies, so looking at using case studies to really show that returning containers is easy, that it's been done by peers, and showing sort of the ways that others have overcome barriers in the past. This process was really helpful for the team, particularly coming up with the interventions. I think there's a real value in them being a part of that process and building that sense of ownership and practicing that application of the behavioral science principles. But I think something good to note here is that, you know, this looks quite simple on paper and case studies aren't anything particularly groundbreaking, but by sort of linking them to the identified behaviors and barriers, we are able to share case studies that are really grounded in people's experience and insights. A few of the other insights that came out of that work was looking at some of the barriers relating to cleaning contracts for multi-site venues. So I mentioned before, we looked at a whole range of different types of commercial settings, but looking at the differences, a single cafe versus a franchise like coffee club, what are the different types of barriers that they're likely to face? And something that came up was looking at, yeah, these cleaning contracts that and needing to kind of take that into account can really present a big barrier for those organizations to participate. And so that was planted a new seed of something to consider for the team. And also considering the timing of interventions and collateral. So Rural have some really great resources. It's a social impact report that they can share with organizations around the impact from returning containers, but through mapping out these different steps along the way, we were able to identify that actually sort of impact at those early stages when people are deciding to participate is a huge driver. And so the importance of promoting that resource earlier in the piece. So taking the time to understand the behavior chains and barriers at each step really helped the team to identify how to optimize their engagement with and the services for their commercial customers. And just to end on a few of the benefits of this approach. So one is, and Bernice touched on this before, just the application of behavioral science and really, you know, going through the process of applying and practicing the application of those principles. And another benefit is around, you know, having user-led strategic priorities. So in this setting, we're looking at commercial customers, but it could be patients in healthcare or teams within an organization that, you know, working on these projects and identifying the behaviors and the barriers along the way really helps to inform strategic priorities that are based on the end users of that system. And there's a real value in the team being part of that approach. Rather, it's one thing to read a report, but I think being a part of that process really adds a lot of value. New knowledge and skills for the team. This came through around just, yeah, using these different processes and learning new ways of doing things, but also creating champions internally, particularly for Worrell, where embedding behavioral science is a strategic priority, that going through this exercise and working together, that at the end of this project, they've definitely got another behavior change champion and someone who really sees the value in that approach. Co-learning and development is another big benefit. Again, in this project, we brought different expertise. So we brought the behavioral science sort of frameworks and ways of exploring challenges, but the team know, you know, returning containers and commercial settings best. And so through combining those skills and exploring the challenge together, we were really able to learn from each other and I think get to some different outcomes. And something that Worrell has done really well is just building trusted advisors. This is more to that sort of partnership approach, but Worrell have really built a strategic village around them, and through, you know, these partnership approaches, that BehaviourWorks has quite a detailed understanding of the, you know, program and past strategies within Worrell. And so when we explore these challenges, we come with a baseline of sort of a solid understanding of their challenges and opportunities. And the overall sort of benefit there is that it provides a really practical and applied understanding of behavioural science, and in general is just a great way to build those partnerships and to connect with our clients. That's it for me, Philia. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. As you can see, this model of capacity building really allows both our researchers and our partner organisations to learn from each other through co-design and other collaborative, approaches to developing interventions and creating change from within. Thank you to all of our speakers and thank you to our audience. There have been some really lovely questions coming in through the Q&A that are being responded to. Thank you for posting those. We do have a little bit of time for a couple more questions, and I invite you to post those in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we address them. It might be nice to talk through some of those openly like this as well. So I might actually look to the Q&A and maybe we can pick one. So there's a couple of questions there. I'll go with the one that was posted a little earlier. Actually, I think Bernice, you're answering that one already. Maybe let's pick up the one that's just come through for Hannah. So Hannah, June asks, could you share how your team prioritizes either internally or with the client on which portions of the process or steps or barriers to intervene on? Also, how do you prioritize and select which interventions to focus on for the new program?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a range of different ways to look at that prioritization. It can be intuitive, particularly looking at across those different steps and barriers. So, at the point of prioritizing which areas of those behavior chains to focus on, part of that was an intuitive process with the team that knew that really well. And then there are more sort of formal tools we can use. And one of my favorites is the sort of impact likelihood or impact effort matrix, where we look at, it's particularly good for prioritizing interventions, looking at, okay, we've got a whole range of ideas here. For each of those, what is the likely impact and how much effort would it take? And a lot of effort isn't necessarily a reason not to go ahead with something, but it's a really helpful framework to look at, well, where do we start? What are the quick wins with things that are really impactful and don't take as much effort? And then what are some of the interventions that we chip away at that might take a little bit more time or require a bit more effort, but still lead to those high impact outcomes?
Thank you, Hannah. And we've got one more question that's come through. What is the best way to find out how to engage with Behaviour Works on pursuing these options for an organisation? So I'm happy to jump in and answer that for you, Jody, and good to see you. The best way would be to have a conversation with our education team. So our education team knows which program would best suit the needs of your organisation, whether it's a program that involves getting a group together, as was done with the boot camp, or whether it's a program that's only for a couple of individuals. We find that our face-to-face, in-person masterclasses are really a great way of upskilling because people meet each other and they see others who have similar challenges to their own. So we find that quite an impactful way of training. So, we deliver our boot camps in person in that way and our masterclasses in that way as well. So I would suggest contacting our education team. I'll make sure I pop the link or the email of who to contact in the chat just before we finish up today. Thank you, Jody. And while we've got one more minute, I just wanted to mention one more example there was a question earlier about what's an example of some learning that's taken place and that has been applied then in the work in the workplace. So we had a student a couple of years ago who completed one of our own online self-paced programs, actually, the micro-credential course. And she was able to take a systems map that she created as part of that course to a group that later became a working group for domestic cats. And she was also able to write a paper or publish a paper that summarized what the drivers and barriers were, the behavioral drivers and barriers that I guess encouraged or were in the way with regard to containing a cat indoors at night. So that was the behavior she wanted to change. Her system map was really great in helping create that working group, which then led to a federal working group, and she was able to publish the results of some of her research on drivers' barriers. So those examples are what we love to hear about that come from our students. Okay. Okay, let's move on. We've just got 2 minutes left, and I don't want to keep you any further. So we have come to the end of our webinar today. We hope that you've taken a lot away, and whether you're cultivating a culture of innovation and adaptability or simply exploring new approaches, we hope that the webinar has offered you some ideas and some options for how you can build behaviour change capacity in your teams. I will also just quickly share that if you're inspired to start your learning, please take a look at our courses page on the BehaviourWorks Australia website. Our next offering is our masterclass. I just have a quick slide here on the masterclass. It starts on the 22nd of October. And if you are considering a career that brings behavioural and systemic changes to the way we live and work, you may consider obtaining a qualification such as the Master of Behaviour and Systemic Change or a Graduate Certificate of Behaviour Change from Monash University. And both of these programs are designed for professionals who are seeking to lead transformative change using behavioural science in complex systems. We have reached the end of our webinar. I will quickly post in the chat some of those links that I've been promising. I'll just copy them and post them in. And we do welcome you to reach out to us, to send us an email or to visit our website to find out some more. Just getting those links, and I'll put them in the chat now. Okay, thank you so much for coming along today, and particularly thank you to those who've attended all 4 of our webinars. The recording from today will be posted on the webpage where the other webinars can also be found, and there's a link here in the chat that I've just posted. And we wish you a great afternoon and hope to see you again soon. Thank you to all our speakers as well.